Hey, one more thing before you go. Have you ever wondered how media and outrage culture shape our emotions and daily lives? Do you know that finding balance in media consumption is crucial for maintaining mental, emotional, and physical well being? In this episode, we'll explore how media influences our inner lives and our relationships and how we can navigate the metaphysical mysteries of connection in today's polarized world and much more. Join me and our special guest, David Beckenmeyer, host of the Outrage Overload podcast, as we uncover the profound effect of media on our emotions and discover ways to foster meaningful connections amidst the noise. I'm your host, Michael Herst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. David Beckenmeyer brings a wealth of experience as a retired tech executive, internet pioneer, and entrepreneur developer. He's a mentor, he's an investor, and he's an advisor in the San Francisco Bay Area. With over 25 years of experience in founding, running, advising, and investing in tech startups, David offers a unique perspective on the intersection of media, outrage, culture, and the human experience. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much, Michael. My pleasure to be here.
What an amazing journey. I mean, a long career that you've got, and then to where you are today doing basically educating people, and I think you're motivating people, and you're allowing a voice to be heard. And so thank you for being in this world.
No, thank you.
I
Appreciate that.
always I like to start at the beginning a little bit to kind of get some background so our people understand you just a little bit more. If you don't mind, where'd you grow up?
So I'm a native Californian. We're rare these days. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. Pretty much have lived there. I had short stints in a few other places, but for the most part, I've either lived in Northern California or Southern California. I'm a Northern California kid, though, so the Southern California stint was a temporary thing for sure. But spent a little time in New York and stuff. But yeah, from the Bay Area here.
Did you? I know that you're in tech, but did you go to college, university?
Yeah, so I was kind of a troublemaker kid, but junior college basically effectively saved my life. And that really changed everything for me to start doing that. And then I went from there and transferred into four-year university. And I was basically at the end of the day I'm a physics dropout. I traded that. I sort of fell into math and computer science and that kind of just and never I thought maybe that was a temporary thing, but it was a black hole that I never pulled out of.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I hated math. I still hate math. I don't like math. I do math, but now I'm lucky because I have AI tools that help me with math. I won't say it out loud because she'll ask me a question. But it is yeah, that's an interesting journey. How'd you get involved in podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, so we're talking about the sort of 2016 election, and that seemed to heat people up and sort of started a lot of arguments, and saw a lot of people fighting and disconnecting from each other and things like that. And I fell into some of those kind of online debates and things like that. And then you had the pandemic and lockdowns, and that seemed to ramp things up more and more people doing that and getting angry at each other, and Uncle Joe's not allowed to Thanksgiving anymore, and everybody seems to have a story like that. And I just kind of saw that circling my life, and sort of said, hey, what's going on here? And kind of being a geek, and kind of a science nerd, it was an opportunity. I sort of saying, what could we do? Well, a podcast is one thing, and I like the idea of a podcast because you can go long form, so I can dig a little deeper. So I could talk to these, and I love talking to these scientists. It was kind of an excuse to go meet all these different scientists and get them a chance to talk about things and other experts in this topic. So it's been a really fun journey, and on the way, hopefully we're making some difference.
That helps a lot. You're kind of, may I ask, I know you have a tech background. What is your tech background? What did you do? What in specific?
Well, I started off, I was that math geek. And in those early days, long ago enough that computers were relatively dumb, especially the microcomputers and small machines. And so, I wrote algorithms like long division and square root and things like that. And, the better you could do that more efficiently, you could sort of do that kind of work. And then moved from there to like video games, and then later large network systems. And then that kind of fit nicely with basically the internet. as that started to come out. So I was very early in the internet, and that's kind of I was using the internet before there was even the web to sort of build an worldwide customer base for this consulting I was doing, and I did that before we even had the web. And so I had built up a lot of internet skill, just kind of getting on the net and running things on the net and the different software, and because a lot of it was kind of DIY back then. And so those skills suddenly became the skills that people wanted. So then I kind of became an internet consultant, and that led me to um, start working with, founding an Earthlink, founding an internet company in the LA area called Earthlink, where we were where we offered regular internet, the real internet, back when people had to, we're using AOL, and it was kind of a closed walled garden thing. We offered people real internet in a way that was easy because, like I said, it was very DIY then. Most people couldn't go find all the things and add it to their computer. We were really the first to, and certainly one of the first to have where you could take a disk, put it in your computer, and like 5 minutes later actually be online. All the process was automatic, and that was pretty unique for then, for that time period. And so we that was our big business then, is getting people on the real internet and building that network out and scaling it to the whole country. And it was wild times.
That's pretty cool. You kind of grew up with it. I mean, when I say grew up, you grew up with the industry in that regard. That's kind of unique in itself. I got introduced to computers at a very early age myself, especially with the police department, because we weren't using computers to write reports in the beginning. But we did have computers that connected us to the National Crime Information Center and the Colorado Crime Information Center and things like that, and which was unique. And then before I left the police department, by then they had computers in the car, and then you could run somebody yourself, you could run plates yourself, you could run individuals yourself, and things like that, if you were out in a call. And they had GPS, where it would tell you where to go and how to get there. Where back in the old days when I first started in law enforcement, you had to memorize a map that was 2 inches thick, and know how to get there quickest and the fastest. And then they change your district and they go, well, do it again. So yeah, I love the digital age. I love the fact how it's grown. I have a master's degree in digital media, actually. So I relate to some of what you've created, and yeah, so I'm real happy that you're here. I know that's not really what we're going to talk about, but kind of a little bit, because we talk about social media and those platforms that have come about in regard to the outrage and the overload that is bringing itself into today's society and culture. So anyway, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So how's your family like? I mean, you
You mean
married,
when
you
I
have
was?
kids?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm married, and we've been married for a long time. One wife so far.
Yeah.
And we have one adult son, and he lives not too far away, in a nearby town.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's one way. That's good for this day and age, is when they say just one wife. I know somebody that's been married like 5 times. I went, why do you keep doing that to yourself? He goes, well, just happens. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Um, what do you think? I mean, when you started this podcast itself, the Outrage Overload podcast, I just went and listened to a lot of your episodes and watched some of your episodes. In regard to the discourse and the conversations that are taking place in today's society, what was your inspiration for actually starting the Outrage podcast? I know we talked about the fact that in 2016 there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of discourse, a lot of divisive conversations back then, especially in and through COVID, especially because everybody, you're sitting in your house, can't go anywhere, can't do anything. You know, we all do that. We get cabin fever and start talking and having conversations and things like that. What brought you to create a forum that you've created?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's not just that we were stuck at home. We were also afraid of things, and I think that amps things up. So have all those emotions kind of tuned up. But yeah, so it really was the experience, of seeing so many people disconnect with longtime friends and family members, and also kind of even myself being, like I was saying, kind of involved in these, being the guy out there getting involved in these Twitter fights, and like what are we getting out of this? There were several kind of straws that broke the camel's back, but one of them was my son. I talked to my son one day, and he said, "Oh, I'm not on Facebook anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, what's that about?" Because his generation, of course, is very much into social media, or usually was, and he was online, and so we kind of had a little conversation, a story about that he got to that point where, yeah, it was the same thing. He was just finding himself angry and almost seeking these fights, because he would like get the little bit of, it was almost like, this is a little, I can win this battle and have this online fight. um, and it would feel good in the moment, of course, but it wouldn't feel good an hour later or a day later. So he kind of coming to that realization that, and he just got off social media. So that was a big, considering how active, that generation is on social media. That was a big kind of a wake up call. That's interesting, that it was big enough problem that you actually completely got off social media.
Yeah, and I think watching this, I think society today, especially most of the individuals that are on social media, no matter which platform it is, whether it's the old Twitter, the new X, or Instagram, Threads, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook. I can't think of any more past that at the moment, but you get that multitude of opportunity where people get to hide behind a microphone or hide behind a camera, so to speak. When I was a cop, we got used to that. That's where road rage came from. You'd see somebody get angry, 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 but they were that angry because they're sitting in a 2-ton car with the windows, mostly rolled up, and the doors locked, kind of a thing. So they felt empowered by the ability to yell and scream and holler out the window or shoot out the window and drive off and do whatever they want because they had this protection wrapped around them. Do you feel that there are similarities to something like that in regard to being able to go on social media and engage in these conversations that explode like this?
There's an aspect to it of that, right? I mean, we aren't used to, it's taught us kind of some bad habits about how we have dialogue, because, yeah, I mean, you don't have those kind of, people definitely say things in these spaces that they probably wouldn't say
Yeah.
in real life. Although we're almost seeing that carry over, that now people find it more okay to say these kinds of things in real life and interact with people that way. To
Yeah.
some degree, it might be because it's our only experience we have now. Like, that's become more normal, or that's just what we have learned. But you're seeing more of this, and so you are seeing some of this carry over into real life. But certainly, I think that sort of safety of, like, I'm off here online, and for some people, there is that kind of trolling side, and that's a more of a subset. But for some people, there is just this trolling idea that they just get their jollies by making people mad. They don't even actually really care about some of these
Yeah.
issues they're talking about. They're just trying to get people mad. But the bigger challenge, is this divisiveness that we're in about. This has been a 60-year process. I've sort of come to learn that of us becoming more and more divided on these things and getting more and more sort of religious about it. Where we almost treat it
Yeah.
like our identity and our religion, and we're right, they're wrong. I'm good, they're bad, and it starts to go much more beyond just differing on issues.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've had a couple conversations in the past week in regard to that in specific, where one of them goes all the way back to 9/11, actually, because I did an episode for 9/11 for tomorrow, or Wednesday, excuse me. Um, and realistically, he related the good versus the bad, the good versus the evil. You know, is us or them. He relates it starting, even in that arena at 9/11 with George Bush and him coming out saying, well, it's you're either with us or you're against us, and this kind of a talk. I know that you look back on time and you see, I mean, if we go back to the Vietnam War, and I did not go to the Vietnam War. I had relatives, I had family, I had friends that went to war. I was about to graduate high school, and I would have been drafted and gone to war as well, but they stopped right before I got out. Um, I think even the atmosphere at that time was divisive, extremely divisive. So when you say we go back like 50, 60 years, without saying how old we are, that'd be about that same time frame, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. I mean, and there are times when they're right. Well, a lot of times people talk about how things have never been this divided. Well, that's sort of true, but also, yeah, you still have times when there's a lot of unrest, the civil rights movement, Vietnam War, of course, our own Civil War.
Yeah,
So we have to keep some things in perspective. But I think the big change over this last 60 years has been making it more tribal about kind of blue and red, Democrat, Republican, and left and right, and we've sort of taken on these tribal characteristics, and and focused really on that. And it really starts to be like a moralization. And that's just been a steady thing. It's like there are big steps along the way. There were some steps in the 90s with media changes there. There were steps with social media and, these kind of things. So there have been steps along the way, but it's been a progression, for quite a while that we've gotten this way. And we are just now at this point where we're just so divided, and not only were we divided like 50-50, very close, we're also bitterly divided.
yeah, I agree with that. I think that when you watch it, especially when you start seeing extremism rear its head and things like this, and you get individuals that really are at such a level with that outrage that they don't hold back whatsoever, whether it be on social media or whether it be outside of social media. And I think that, at least from watching, even in my career, I saw people that it's like I take it back to we had individuals that I think I would say participated in crowd control and arrest with about three different close to riots demonstrations that turn into riots. And it's not a pretty place to be in. It just isn't. And the majority of what you witnessed, at least from a law enforcement perspective, was you see the anger on both sides, and you saw that nobody wanted to listen. You saw that it's my way or the highway on all sides, kind of a situation, which is unfortunate that the society has evolved in such a way that we can't have a friendly conversation any longer. We can't have a sit down and when I grew up as a kid, I grew up in the 60s as well. And I would assume that you grew up in the 60s. The I grew up during that time period. I grew up where it still was racial segregation in the early portion of my life. And, I couldn't go play with the black kids, or I couldn't go play with the Spanish kids and things like this. And I watched all this. I watched Martin Luther King and his assassination. I watched Bobby Kennedy get shot. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I watched Bobby Kennedy get shot. John F. Kennedy, I didn't get to watch that one because I was still kind of a 3-year-old. But when he got shot, I think that it still was indelible upon me because my father and my mother talked about it quite a bit. My father was a journalist, so he had to cover a lot of that. And I know that stayed with him for quite some time, from John F. Kennedy to Robert Kennedy. That kind of stuff came with him as a journalist because he continued to cover it, and it affected him immensely with regard to the divide there during this time period. Um, do you think social media, and we may have kind of covered this when you first spoke a minute ago, do you think social media has been a benefit to us in a positive or a negative way in regard to building that wall? I guess that would be a good question.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna preface that a little bit to say we're all kind of looking for the magic bad guy, like that we could just point at this one thing and fix it, and all of our problems would go away. And of course, it's more complicated than that. But social media has certainly been a contributor on this, and there's continues to be, and there has been, and there continues to be a lot of research about this. So a lot of work, a lot of people are looking into this. These are all kind of positive signs that people are looking into this and aware of these problems. But um, yeah, so social, I would say regarding these different the division, yeah, social media has definitely been a contributing factor to it. I mean, we've never really had, it's one of these problems that our sociology is kind of behind our technology. So we have this space now where you can have these conversations with people from all over the world, and big conversations with lots and lots of people. And we've just never really, we haven't really trained ourselves to do that. And there can be bad actors thrown in, so they can start kind of stirring the pot and getting people riled up. And you kind of combine all that, and it's not a great. We haven't yet really figured out how to make the best of it in a lot of ways, particularly with some of these heated kinds of conversations. And it takes a lot of discipline that a lot of us don't have. So yeah, it's definitely been a factor. There's been a lot of research showing that. I mean, and there still are some, there's still people that are saying there's some good aspects of it as well. But overall, from I've looked at it so much with some of the papers I've looked at, and maybe I'm in too much of a bubble because I'm really looking at all these things related to polarization. But all the research there pretty much shows it's been a very had very negative consequences. And some of it comes back to a very simple thing, right? I mean, it's the incentives. They want the clicks and the likes and the shares. And when that's your only, like you've just tuned your algorithm that I want more clicks and likes and shares without any consequence, I don't care who's affected or who's hurt by it. What you find is, lots of negative content is what it's kind of part of our psychology that we like the negative. We have to watch the car wreck, we have to watch the car burn, the car crash or whatever, and so that's what happens is this negative content surface bubbles to the top. It's what gets all the attention, and it also creates a misperception. Like, I love that you mentioned earlier that you have these extremes on both sides doing a lot of these things, and it's a misperception that everybody's like that, because you actually, there's a majority of people that aren't like that, but they're not the ones getting the headlines. They're not the ones being promoted on social media. They're not the ones we see. So we see all these people doing these, more extreme things, and we think like our whole, our political adversaries, everybody on the other side of the table is like that. And that's a misperception too. And so, yeah, all of that adds up to really, stoke this fire.
Well, how do you think media, you just mentioned earlier, and I told you my father was a journalist. He's no longer with us, but he was a journalist. How do you think media plays a factor in shaping our emotions and how we react to different things? Do you think that they are stoking the flame, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that all this is just social media or the online world and all that. But but this idea of getting us fired up and riled up and angry at each other goes out into the real world. It goes out into political
Yeah,
campaigns. It's a technique. It simplifies their life. And I think so. So you see it there. So we maybe can come back to that a little bit. But on the media side, yeah, in terms of TV, radio, traditional media, I mean, we had a sort of golden era. A lot of people harken back to Walter Cronkite and all that, and people think that's kind of the way it always was. But we've always had partisan media. This goes
yeah,
back, forever. Um, as long as we've had media, there was a little window there where there was only three TV networks. All these factors played into it, and people sort of want that to be like that. It's kind of can't be like that now. We've got this very
too many.
diversified media. Yeah, we got too many. It's very diversified. So, but yeah, so what we saw from like the last 30 years, this increase in the media has to now be a profit center. Like for a while, news was more like it was funded by I Love Lucy and whatever, Mary Tyler Moore, all these old TV shows, and they paid the bills, and the
Hmm.
news was not necessarily a profit center. Now you've got all this competition, you've got all these everybody wants competing for attention. So the news media now has become another profit center. So now they're doing the same thing, right? They have to compete for our eyeballs and our time and our attention. So what, again, the same kind of thing. Some of the more um, extravagant stuff is what surfaces and what gets the attention, and all, so that has happened, right? So if you look at we talk about journalism,
Yeah,
and that you're involved in journalism, and that writers, many times the reporter, like, people think, well, why'd you give it that headline? It didn't match the story. And like, I didn't give it the headline, the marketing department gave it the headline. I didn't even write the headline,
exactly.
right? Yeah, so there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah,
But I do want to say that what's a big challenge we have now is the overload. Like you mentioned, too much, right? Too much media.
yep.
I mean, the thing is, I do want to say, like, I don't want people to become so cynical they think we don't have good journalism, because we have more good journalism today than we've ever had. The problem is it's hiding out there among lots of bad journalism. And the tools, I just did a recent episode about that, with some tools out there that can help curate, and you can spend less time getting some good information. But yeah, that's the big problem, is the tools are that it's hard to find the good information, right? And who has time to do all that work, right?
Yeah.
We don't.
You open up an Edge web browser, and it comes up with a start page, and that start page has got, like, I don't know, at least a couple hundred different headlines flashing across there all over from the top to the bottom. You can scroll all the way down. By the time you get back to the top, it starts back over again. And it's headline after headline after headline after story after story after story after headline. And it gets kind of overwhelming. It just,
and and if you only read the headlines, which for a lot of us that's all we have time for, you're going to get a very skewed picture of the world.
exactly. Because again, it goes even in the media world, not just journalism, but in the media world, they want to make the most flamboyant headline they can get in order to get your eyes in place to sit there and watch and go look at their channel because they're looking for ratings. Ratings get them advertisement. Advertisement gets them more money. More money, they get paid more. So, it's that never ending circle there that will continuously go on. I do believe that there are good journalists out there. I do believe there are good media individuals, and that's why I think we're all selective about who we watch and why we watch them, or who we listen to and why we listen to them. Sometimes, again, there's bad actors in all aspects of that, whether it be radio, internet, television, whatever form of media streaming that is coming out in whatever form, whether it be cable, antenna, there's always in any profession, there's always bad actors in there as well, and the ones that are out there to strengthen one side or the other because that's the way that they feel. Back when my father was a news worked for the newspaper, it was simple. He said I'm bound by a journalistic code of ethics where I get both sides of the story and I'm impartial to what I print and write. And I think that's changed quite a bit, not just in the print media, but also in multimedia. That again is I won't say clickbait, but pretty close to it because there are a number of headlines that you click. You look at the headline and you click to open the article, or you want to watch the video, and that's how they make money. So it. How do you think? I mean, earlier you had mentioned. I'm trying to keep all of these thoughts really quick so I don't overload my own brain. You talk about the the audience enjoys, and I can see this even when I was working the job. You know, we go to a traffic accident, and the traffic accident wasn't the problem. It was everybody stopping to look at the traffic accident was the problem, and then we caused two or three more because they're all rubbernecking, and so it's like it's in the driver's manual, right? It's did you stop and look? A, B, or C? No, yes, no, maybe, kind of a thing. I think that we as a society, do you see any forefront in something that we can do to help manage our rubbernecking in regard to all this bombard, especially now with the political discord that's going on right now, the left and the right and the middle and the independents and what's going on with all aspects of the election that's coming up? What we see is a bombardment of this coming from all sides, misinformation, attacking, name calling, and subjugating everyone to either half truths or complete lies in order to gain a vote. How do we wade through that? How do we sift through that? I know you have a tool that on your site there, but do you have ways that that we can kind of fine tune ourselves into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. There's more we can do individually than sort of societal, so we have to sort of start with ourselves, right? But yeah, and some of the challenges, of course, it goes against our nature to a degree, right? Because we, as humans, we sort of like to classify things, we like to simplify things, um, and we're tribal. That's kind of our evolutionary niche. So we kind of have to fight all that by activating sort of the front part of our brain, and so some of it has to do, a lot of it has to do with kind of being more aware. People use the term mindful. So if we're mindful that there are folks that benefit from us becoming angry and kind of stop being rational, then we can sort of tune up that dial a little bit and say, hey, this person is saying a thing. I mean, they're on my side, supposedly. I mean, that's usually the best place to start. Start with the people on your side because it's easy to criticize people on the other side. But start to be more critical of the folks on your side. Like when you're watching a news program that is sort of the people on your side and you're starting to get angry, that should almost be your signal that there's probably more of this story. Maybe I don't know the whole story, and And that's when it's probably time to see, should I be this mad about this? Because they're obviously trying to make me mad, because that makes their life easier. This is true for politicians as well. When the politicians that are supposedly on sort of my side are using some of this kind of tactics, or they're spending all their energy telling us how terrible the other side is, like, but they're not telling you their policies. Like, their life is easier if all they have to do is tell you the other side is bad. That's just super easy for them, right? That they don't have to worry about policy, and nobody's really accountable when all that happens, because every time they get elected, they can say, "Oh, I couldn't do anything because the other side stopped me." So blame them again, right? So we don't get much accountability. So this tactic really works. Politicians love this mode that we're in, that we're willing to blame the other side for everything, and we become a party to it. So some of it is just that mindfulness. Be aware that all these actors are benefiting from you being mad at the other side and sort of dismissive of facts and dismissive of logic and other things. And you like it too. I mean, also be aware that your brain likes it too, because you can then moralize and say, I like seeing, I mean, you don't say this to yourself, but this is what happens is, I like seeing the other side do dumb things that make me mad, because that reinforces that I made the right choice. I'm on the right team. I'm the moral one. They're the immoral one. So we'll accept that kind of media without going, oh, are they really telling me the whole story? Maybe it's not as bad as they're telling me, that kind of thing, right? Because we like it too. Like, we want it too. Like, this is why we reshare things before reading them, right? Because it sounds so good to be true that I want it to be true, and I'm just going to share it, because so we're kind of a party to it. So that mindfulness is the way to try to step back from it, and keep asking that question: am I getting the full story here? And also, am I if I'm mad all the time, I'm not thinking clearly. And so if I can get out of that mode a little bit, maybe I will find a few things. I'm not saying there aren't things to be outraged about. There probably are. Maybe there's things we should be more outraged about. But when you're just in outrage mode, the dial's turned up to 11 all day long. All the usefulness of kind of outrage as a tool to sort of motivate and inspire you to do things stops working, because you're just mad. And so what do you end up doing? All you end up doing is sort of shouting at your neighbor, or posting something mean to Facebook, or, you're not actually being an activist. You're not actually sort of helping the situation any. You're just keeping that fire going and keeping yourself riled up as well, which is bad for your own mental health. So that's a big thing. It's just kind of have that realizing that these things may feel good in the moment, but they're hurting me long term.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a lot of psychology involved, I think, in all aspects of this when you start to think about it, and how it affects. I think media and culture influence our lives and our relationships to such a point that, no matter what relationship we're in, it's our own personal tribe as well as a larger tribe. Our family's a tribe, our community's a tribe, our city's a tribe, and I think that it kind of goes and expands upon each other as as these things come about. I think you like you said earlier, I'm going to share this, and I'm going to share this, I'm going to share this. How do you think that affects our? Let me try it this way. How do you think media and culture influence our political atmosphere at the moment? I mean, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, it is going to be a challenge, because the incentive structure is there, right? And so it is going to be, it's kind of got to be a bottom up thing. I think that we're going to have to start taking the action and start, rejecting these politicians that use these tactics. We're going to have to actually there's going to have to be consequences when people use these tactics, and that's not going to come from the top down. So that's, and there are a lot of people looking at this, right? I mean, some of the places for hope is there's a lot of research being done. There's also a lot of practitioners out there sort of teaching people how to interact and have civil dialogue and learn about the other side a little bit, and realize, those people on the other side, they have kids, they drive to school, they drive on the same roads you do, they drink the same water. Like, there's so many things that you have in
Right.
common, and they're real people. They're not this evil thing that you can dehumanize. So there's a lot of that kind of work going on. So I think all of those things can help. And I think, something else about the tribal thing is important to note, that, we are kind of craving that. So that's really, and it's good to have tribes,
Yeah.
but it's picking the tribes, right? And a religion, religion maybe for some people works, but maybe it's something else. But politics substituting for a tribal is not very good.
It's not good. I agree with that. I agree with that 100% actually. I think that, for the longest time, it's, as you said earlier in this conversation, it has torn families apart, and you know, politics have always been, yeah, it's always been a touch and go throughout life anyway. My mother was a Republican, my father was a Democrat. So we had that in the household, but they had conversations, they had civil conversations in regard to different things or how they were going to vote and so forth. And I think that that has come about in this day and age that it's very difficult to have a civil conversation in regard to Democrats or Republicans. I have voted in the past. I have voted for Republicans that I felt were better for the job, whatever they were running for, and I vote for Democrats that have done this, for the same reason, and or I voted for an independent a few times in regard to that. But the atmosphere has changed to such a point. I think part of that comes about with that discourse is the instantaneous knowledge we have in the palm of our hand. And I'm guilty of it. I'm glued to my phone. I'm glued to my iPhone. And unfortunately, every time my notifications are on, I had to go through and physically make sure that I turned off all the notifications because they were just bombarding me over and over and over again. And it, like every 2 or 3 seconds, I was getting something from Instagram or from X or from Threads or from Facebook or whatever the case may be. It was a constant influx of, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. And in being able to read each one of those, it created that anger that you're talking about, because I started getting angry at not only one side, but all sides. It's like you kind of want to quiet all sides. It's like, just slow down, take a minute, have a civil conversation, and let me think, for myself, so to speak. Let me stop and really evaluate what's being said and what's being done and what's kind of it. Excuse me. I had to do the same thing with my news. I was subscribed to New York Times, to the Washington Post, to the Washington Examiner, to USA, to every newspaper out there. I had a subscription to, and at first I thought, well, I'm supporting the journalists, I'm supporting the media individuals because I grew up in that environment. I grew up in the newsroom. I mean, I literally grew up in a newsroom. I watched my father typing when I was like 5 years old, 6 years old, on up, typing stories. I went with him every time he went to a train wreck or a car wreck or a crime scene. It made me want to become a cop, actually, going to all the crime scenes. So something good came out of it, right? But it was a situation that I grew up in that newsroom. I grew up in that environment. I grew up in seeing a room full of reporters on a typewriter, kind of a thing. Before they moved into computers, my dad didn't live long enough to go to the computer side of it. But it was. I thought I was supporting all of this, and what it turns out is I was getting an overload of media, like you had mentioned earlier. I had to filter. I had to go through and filter. I canceled my subscription to the New York Times I've had for 20 years. I had to cancel my subscription to some of these other newspapers, Washington Post and so forth, so that I could be more selective with regard to, I still get emails from them, and I decide if I want to open the article or not from that perspective. And I think it took me a little while of kind of reprogramming my brain.
Yeah, and completely tuning out, is also kind of got its own problem. Although taking a break sometimes is we do need. But yeah, it's finding that balance. That's what's really hard. Like
Yeah.
you want to stay informed, and it can be really hard to do that. And it's not easy. There's no easy magical fix in terms of like you just go to some site that's going to rate publications and pick the
Yeah.
two that are best. Because even there, is still a scale. A good publication will sometimes put out bad articles. A bad publication will sometimes put out good articles. So even that isn't a real solution. So it is challenging for sure.
I
And I,
think.
and I, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Please go ahead. I was trying to clear my throat. I'm
I was
just
just
getting over a cold, so forgive me. I'm trying to like not get it to affect in this, but you can hear them. So sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that another thing that's kind of happened is that because of all this consolidation in some of the TV and larger media, is that there's so much focus now on national issues. There's not as much reporters like your dad, right? There's not as much of that going on.
Yeah.
There's so much focus on these national issues, and then that can kind of stress us out over things we have very little control over, like how much impact are we even having? How much impact we way overestimate the impact of a president, right, on our daily lives, right, and things like that. So you can have much more impact focusing on some local issues, and so that can be sometimes a way to feel like I'm getting, I'm involved more and I'm
Yeah.
doing things rather than just focusing all the time on these national affairs that we often don't have that much influence over.
Well, and that in itself, when you look at the rhetoric and the everything that's going around, the political violence, the rhetoric, the toxicity of the whole situation, it just gets you, it gets you riled up. It gets you mad. And it's not really a good way to start your day, or it can create so many more issues than that. Do you find a connection between extreme political polarization and the escalation to political violence within all this?
Well, it is concerning because as you're able, because it's this certainty that enables things like violence and dehumanizing. You can dehumanize someone once you believe I'm so certain that I'm morally right, then I can dehumanize them, and then
Yeah.
that starts that path that it's a little bit closer to violence. So definitely the toxic polarization mode that we're in, where we believe these narratives we've been telling ourselves for years and years, that the other side is just morally bad, and not only do they have the bad, worse ideas for fixing the country, they don't even have good intent, right? And and this is when, like, we're not Americans together. Like, there's not shared, we're not finding those shared values.
Yeah.
And even though in real life, when you go look at this, there really are these shared values. So yes, the polarization is definitely kind of a path that could go there. But I also want to say, like, it's easy to, you don't want to catastrophize either and say, like, yeah, we're absolutely going to have civil war in 2 years or something like that. But it definitely helps create that. Like, if we can't bring this temperature down and this just keeps escalating, then yeah, I mean, definitely violence is in the mix.
Who do you think profits from this division that we've got currently?
Well, that's the challenge. Is so many do, right? Like I was saying before, politicians do, because it makes their life easier. If all they have to do is convince us the other side is bad, then they can keep getting worse and we'll still vote for them because, oh, well, the other side's worse. So
Yeah.
we're still going to vote for these people. We don't even like the issues anymore, but, well, we're going to vote for them because, well, the other dude can't win because he's terrible or she's terrible or whoever it is. So we believe we believe these narratives. And so they win. So politicians win for sure. They want us so mad at the other side that they will kind of like turn a blind eye to whatever our side's doing. So they win. The news media wins because their life gets simpler too, right? At least the ones that are more partisan, right? If they need that ratings one night, if they know we're kind of mad about a bunch of things, well, they can pull one of those out of the hat, and bammo, they're going to get some ratings for that, right? So it makes their life easier too if they can keep us on these divided paths and keep us agitated about certain issues. Then when they need some ratings, they just ramp up that issue a little bit, and then that gets their audience going. So, and social media, it's sort of a side effect of what they're doing because they don't really care about who wins or who loses. But again, it helps them if we have these simple worldviews where we're good, the other side's bad, our side's good, their side's bad. Because again, for social media, that's the kind of stories we react to, the kind of articles we react to. So social media likes it too because they make more money. It's easier for them to have clicks. So all of these players benefit. And so there isn't any one person that benefits. Although, if you wanted to do the whole conspiracy thing, you could argue that there's, sort of the larger kind of oligarchy style of companies win too, right? Because we're not looking at them anymore. We're mad at our neighbors. Like, we're not actually mad at the people that are doing harm to us. We're mad at our own neighbor right down the street.
Yeah, that's unfortunate too. Yeah. So it reminds me, like, when I was a cop, I didn't tell anybody in the neighborhood I was a cop. See, and because everybody's you either when you need a cop, it's either for, and this it sounds weird, but you're either a criminal when you have an interaction with a police officer. You're either a criminal or you're a victim. 90% of the time, you're a criminal or you're a victim. So both of those are negative right from the get go, whatever it happens to be. So I would go into a restaurant and we would have to leave the restaurant because I had arrested the cook, kind of a thing, right? Or I'd go into a restaurant and somebody would see that I was a police officer, and I'd try to eat lunch and they'd be over there asking, "What about this? A complaint about my ticket? Why did so and so give me a ticket?" And it's like, I'm just trying to have my lunch. I don't know who that is. I'll look into it. Thank you very much. I wore stripes, so I had a sergeant. I was a sergeant. So they'd say, well, it's probably one of your guys, so I need you to talk to him about my ticket or whatever the case may be. It was a constant. So I'd come home, I wouldn't tell anybody I was a cop because I didn't want my neighbors all mad and pissed off and angry at me because of something that happened to them in the neighborhood. And now we're kind of getting to that point now where our neighborhood keeps to themselves. You don't tell whether you support Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or you support Donald Trump or whoever the case may be. People are keeping more to themselves with regard to that. Now, nobody's really outspoken about it. I don't see any signage in anybody's yard now like we did in 2016. I didn't see any of that, or even 2020. I'm not seeing that as much now. So I think part of the political discourse might be kind of slowing down just a little bit, although the rhetoric is continuing.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I would sort of agree with that too. Yeah, I think there has been a little bit of a tone down of that of the yard signs and all that kind of thing.
And
And
I don't think,
I don't know for sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like, what are the reasons behind that?
well, yeah, I mean, I think obviously we all have a voice, and I think we should, my daughter's husband, his family are very staunch Republican. And I mean, like really staunch Republican. And it creates issues at the dinner table, kind of a situation that to that extent. So my daughter and her husband don't go home very often to his house because it's a constant debate at the table, a constant debate in the house, and they get in a fight, and then they end up leaving, which isn't good for anybody's mental health or well-being. Which brings me to this question. I know we've talked a little bit about psychology and how it affects us and our well-being. Do you and I realize that not from a psychological aspect, just from your experience in discussing this with other professionals within that arena, do you find that the the current state of affairs with especially with media and with anger and with the rhetoric going around that it creates a psychological focus for us needing something to help us with better mental health and well-being? That's a long
Oh,
question. I'm sorry.
no, yeah, no, 100%, yeah, 100%. And this has come from experts that I've talked to across multiple disciplines, that there's sort of a malaise in our society now, and there's so many factors in it, or like mental health, or seeking mental health is seen as kind of a fault or a flaw, and so there's all these stigma about it, and so there's all these factors that kind of play into it. Um, and I think this comes out in many ways, but I mean, in the political spectrum, I think a lot of that comes out in how people are very frustrated with both parties. Right? You see this more and more. You talked about a staunch Republican or a staunch Democrat. I mean, these are like 8 or 10%, or maybe somewhere around there of the population. Most other people are lean one way or the other to some degree, and a lot of people are what they might call, like you said, sort of independent, or they just see themselves as more moderate or something like that, right? Um, and if you really look at how we look at issues, there's more people that have a cross section of issues. They might still lean one way or the other when it comes to sort of the tribal thinking, but you find in real life that there's more cross cutting on those issues. But nobody really wants to talk about that because, like I said before, that the ones on the edges get all the attention. But yeah, there definitely is a mental health crisis in probably the world, but certainly in the U.S. right now. And some of that I think does come back to that awareness of it, like just realizing that a lot of this, that it's there, and that and it's okay to seek help.
Yeah, I think, and that's a PSA for everyone out there that's watching or listening. The fact is don't be afraid to ask for help in any situation, whatever it happens to be, especially in the mental health arena. There's resources out there that you can reach out to anonymously if that's the way that you want to approach it. Um, what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to cope with outrage in their life?
Yeah, I mean, I I think a lot of it comes back to what we were talking about in the beginning with just trying to be more mindful about it, and It's hard though. I mean, this is easy words to say, hard to do. And some of these
Yep.
solutions often sound trite, like, well, that's not going to work. But over and over again, you see these sort of things that seem trite do work, right? So even just like maybe taking a break. We talked about that a little bit. So take a break from social media for a while. Maybe take a break from the news, and and then figure out a strategy for how you're going to go back in that you'll maintain it in some way. And other relatively simple things like turn the machines off, turn the digital machines off at bedtime, a little before bedtime. These again they seem trite and lame, but these are big factors. Like if you can get a good night's sleep and turning those machines off, you'll get a better night's sleep. If your phone and your other devices have like a sleep mode, activate that sleep mode, so that you won't get those notifications all night long. When you wake up, it won't. They'll be sitting there when you wake up and it's your morning wake up time. The notifications will be there. They'll be fine. They didn't need you at 3 o'clock in the morning. So all those that can be a factor. So some of those simple things can really matter. And some of it is, like I said before, about being mindful about when you're be strategic about how you're going online. Be strategic about how you're watching the news, and even be strategic about how you're going to enter into conversations with folks on opposing sides of the spectrum. Like, try to be intentional about going into listen mode, and maybe not having one conversation where you only listen, right? And you don't even push back on anything. You just, maybe you don't acknowledge that you agree with it, but I'm glad you told me that opinion. Find some words that let you kind of not agree with them, but neither fight with them, right? Or argue about it that day. And then that will help you. All of those things will help you be less stressed out about it. But also, potentially, if you do care about, sharing your view, you'll have a more informed view at that point about why they think about these things. Like sometimes I talk about, if you're going to talk about you're going to talk with someone, and you have to be, not everybody's ready for this from either side. So, you can have to wait how this works. But if you can find somebody well enough that would cooperate with you, instead of saying, I'm going to convince you I'm right, and you're going to convince me, you're going to try to convince me you're right, say, let's go on a journey together and try to understand why we see this differently. And if you attack that problem, then you've got a shared problem you're trying to solve together, rather than I'm going to win, you're going to lose.
That's the thing I learned in my old career, the most valuable tool that I was able to carry with myself and with other individuals was communication. Communication is the key to success in any relationship, even if it's a brief one. And that, talking, civil conversation, civil conversation. So I agree with everything you just said. It's just a matter of understanding that we're both human beings. We both have opinions as to what we want and what we need and what we want to hear. But we also have opinions of what we don't like, and we shouldn't be afraid to share them with each other. And but do it respectfully in such a way that we can have a civil conversation instead of, walk away. And who knows? And I'm saying this to those out there. Who knows? You may walk away with more information than you had before because you didn't understand or know something from a different perspective. And that's the value of having different society and cultures in and around you, is that you get to learn something from a different perspective that you didn't realize was there in the first place. In building upon that, do you think we have the opportunity to build a more resilient and compassionate society in lieu of the outrage?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, like I say, there's challenges ahead. A lot of social scientists and others talk about what's it going to take for us to start, kind of reversing this
Yeah,
trend. But for everything that we do that kind of is a downward spiral, well, you can kind of just reverse that and start things that turn into an upward spiral, right?
yeah,
So some of that is, some of these actions you can take, like start focusing more locally, be intentional, things like that. These can be, those can be factors, things like improving your skills. So, there are organizations like Braver Angels, and I'm involved in one called Crossing Party Lines. And we conduct these moderated conversations with people with different perspectives, where it's not a debate. You're not really trying to convince the other side over,
right,
win the other side over. You just want to get an opportunity to share your viewpoint, without it turning into a fist fight, or a verbal fight
yeah,
either. And so that's one thing we don't have a lot of practice in, right? We aren't used to having, because we've bubbled up, we tend to get in our own groups. We're hanging out with people that think similarly to us. When we do get into one of these situations where there's people that don't agree with us, we're not used to it. Like, and we're so used to people agreeing with it, we find them like weird. Like, what happened that they don't think like us? Everybody else I know
Mhm.
thinks like me, and it's not something we have practice with. So getting more practice with that, and and one of the ways you do that is by setting that intention to listen. And it can be hard because you can get triggered, because this is what usually happens. Like the first time you hear someone say something that it seems like starkly disagreeing with you, you get triggered and you don't even know sometimes you just freeze. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what to say from here.
Mhm.
But get more used to that listening, and taking it in, and then trying to maybe come back on another day and say, hey, we talked about thing. You want to go on a walk? Because it's also good to add physicality to it, right? Go on a walk together, and maybe we can go on a walk together and have a little bit more of that conversation or something. Or would you, I listened to you for an hour, would you be, maybe I've earned you listening to me for a few minutes, right? And, something like that, because that's part of it too. You can earn the right to have your side told a little bit, and you can gain some of that, because you may not, if you're just going to jump in the conversation and start telling everybody what they should think, you haven't really earned that. Right?
Exactly.
Didn't give them a chance
Yeah.
to tell their side of the story. So if you spend some time doing that listening, you can maybe then use that plea that, like, hey, I got a chance to tell some of my side. Would you be okay if I told you some of my thoughts on this?
That's a brilliant way. Yeah, it's an easier approach, I think. It's a very critical opportunity for you to be able to have a better understanding of each other's viewpoints and then see how they integrate, or whether, you, again, like I said just a few minutes ago, to build upon what you just said, you can walk away with more information that you did not know, and you're not trying to change anybody's mind. What you're trying to do is have a simple conversation. In that conversation, you may walk away with something that's going to benefit you in some way as well. So yeah, I appreciate that very much. I I did have one question that I did write down, and of course, what are some of the most important things that you've learned about outrage culture since starting the podcast?
I think one of the big factors is that we are kind of blind to when we're participating in it. We see it in others, but we have a hard time seeing it in ourselves, and that's difficult to do. And in many parts of our lives, we have a hard time seeing things in ourselves. But trying to become more mindful of when we're an active participant in it, like I do these what I call these man on the street or street outrage interviews, where I just talk to regular people, and I go into that listen mode, and I just listen, and I talk about social media use, things like that. And it's kind of funny because you see people that say, yeah, I hate the vitriol, and I'm really sick of it and sick of it. And it's because those darn Democrats do this thing all the time, right? And they just don't realize they're just contradicting themselves right there at the same time, and they fall right into it. Or statements like that just show that we really have blind spot when we're doing it ourselves, and that and overcoming that can be a big challenge. And even if you understand some of the science and you understand some of the cognitive biases that are at play, you still can become a party to it. So opening your mind that certainty is probably something to be careful with, because certainty is what can lead us to bad paths. So be open to, you could be wrong. Be open to, there may be more perspectives. Maybe I don't have the whole picture here, and some things like that. That's one of the big ones. Is there this aspect of this blind spot? And like I said earlier, another big one is just how many people benefit from us being in this mode. And it's not us. Like, as individuals, we don't benefit. As society, we don't benefit. So it's not. And so that's a challenge too. That's something that's a big factor in this. That the incentive structure for our media, for our politics, are so geared, and then our own brain as well. Like, our own brain is a party to this, and so those are some of the big challenges here in it. And I think
Mm.
that we just have a hard time realizing, because we think we're super rational people that only come up to that, they're always looking at the facts and have made the right conclusion based on facts. And what I and if you ask me, being a science guy, I was a math guy, I was a physics guy, I'm thinking, of course I'm only making rational decisions, right? But that's probably a big one, is that most of our decisions are not as rational as we think they are.
We think they might be, but you look at it from that outside perspective, and it changes that a little bit. I worked domestic violence task force for about 4 years, and I had these conversations similar to that. I mean, unfortunately, on a domestic violence level, but 90% of that was nobody was listening to the other person, and they were only thinking about themselves and what they were getting out of it and what they were achieving. And we had to help them understand that, you just have to listen. You just have to open your ears and your heart and take the time, kind of a situation.
And also remember that facts are subject to interpretation, right? I mean, we come to know
Absolutely.
things based on facts, based on our experiences, based on our network and our social network. Like, just keep that in mind. Like, that the same exact fact can have all kinds of different conclusions based, and they all assume there's this idea called naive rel- realism, naive realism, where we assume the logic we use to come to a conclusion is the right logic, and everyone would just do the same thing, right, and come to the same conclusion given those same facts. And that can get us in trouble because we really like our brain kind of takes a glitch when we see somebody else took the exact same facts and came to a different conclusion.
Oh, I see that so much today and what's going on. Yes, I do. I would love to talk to you for another hour. I know that we can't at the moment, but we can. You can always. You're more than welcome to come back on the show anytime. We can continue this conversation. In the meantime, let's talk about Outrage Overload and how somebody can reach you and find you and where they can listen, please, and watch.
Yeah, the super easy way is at outrageoverload.net. And I'm very my contact info is all out there, and I love hearing from anybody that's even listened to 5 minutes of a show. If you listen to 5 minutes and say, this is the stupidest show I've ever heard, I want to hear from you too. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions. All my contact info is there at outrageoverload.net. And we have a couple of other shows. Outrage Overload is our flagship podcast. That's a Connors Institute podcast out of Shippensburg University. And but I also have a couple of other shows that are a little bit lighter. I have one called Outrage Science Bites that runs occasional short form episodes about just some little unique. Like I think I did an episode on naive realism one time. So it's things like that. I might take one little piece of related stuff and talk just about that for a few minutes. And then we have another show, a weekly show that's a little bit of it's sort of a chat show that's kind of a silly show that my wife and I do actually weekly. Typically, we broadcast that live, and it gets repurposed as a podcast, and that's called This Week in Outrage. And that one we do share some outrage in a lighthearted way, but so that's a little different than my show. That's much more serious. My main premier outrage overload show.
Well, we have to have that lighthearted atmosphere. We have that in common. My wife and I do over the Teacup Sundays, and that's where we do the lighthearted stuff and the TV reviews, the movie reviews, and the banter and plus we get to spend a lot of extra time together having fun.
Right? It's great. We really look forward to doing that show together. Even if we had 7 listeners, we'd probably still do it.
Exactly. It's great. It's great. It's good. It's good. Well, listen, your Instagram is there at the. Let me try that in English. Your Instagram is right there on the screen in front of everybody, so they can find you or locate you there. I know that you can also find them on your website, so I'll make sure that everything is in these show notes so that they can just click a link. It'll take you right to them. It's been great. Fantastic opportunity, I think. Thank you very much for this conversation. This is one more thing before you go. Do you have any other? I mean, you've said a bunch, but do you have any quick words of wisdom before we leave?
One of the scientists told me, and I forget her name now for a moment, so I apologize, but told me her sort of version of E equals MC squared for this environment we're in. And it's that social death we're more afraid of social death than we are of physical death.
Whoa, that's a little deep. Yeah, but it works. I love it. I love it. Brilliant words of wisdom. Brilliant words of wisdom. Listen, thank you very, very much, David, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to having another conversation with you.
Absolutely. Yo, thank you so much, Michael. It was my pleasure to be here.
And for everyone else out there, and one more thing before you go, community, thank you very much for being a part of this. One more thing before you all go, have a great day, have a great week, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.